Greetings everyone, and hope you're having a great time here at the Windows Server Summit. I'm Jeff Woolsey. I'm a program manager here at Microsoft, and I'm here with my colleague Rob, and we're going to be talking about upgrades made easy with Windows Server 2025. Rob, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Hey everyone, my name is Rob Hindman. I'm a program manager on Windows Server, specializing in upgrades and failover clustering.
And Rob, when he says specializing in upgrades and failover clustering, he's kind of a humble guy. I wanted to be here to actually hype him up because a lot of what you're going to see today was driven by Rob when it comes to upgrades. And we know that upgrades are a critical feature for folks. So it's why we focused on, and indeed, making upgrades easier with Windows Server 2025. So today for our agenda, we're going to talk about a number of things. We're going to talk about media upgrades. We're going to talk about feature updates. We're going to talk about, of course, upgrading domain controllers, very common question, as well as upgrading clusters. Now, one of the reasons that really kind of sparked having this session was every time we've been chatting with folks like yourself about Windows Server 2025 and all the new rich innovation, whether it's Hyper-V, whether it's AI, whether it's GPU, whether it's storage, whether it's software-defined networking, whether it's software-defined storage, whether it's Active Directory, whether it's PowerShell, whether it's SMB, whether it's group policy. Again, I could go on and on and on. Windows Server 2025 is a rich feature release. This is chock full of innovation throughout the release, and every time we show it, customers say, this looks amazing. How can I get to Windows Server 2025 faster so that I can start to take advantage of these awesome new features like hot patching, for example? So that's really the impetus of why we spent a lot of time focusing on upgrades and this session today. So let's go ahead and get started with Windows Server media upgrades. And I have to admit, this is probably a term that I'm not sure many people even know about. It's one of those terms that's kind of inside Microsoft. So I want to take a moment to quickly define what I mean by a media upgrade. A Windows Server media upgrade refers to the process of installing from media, whether it's a DVD, USB, or an ISO file inside of a virtual machine, for example. But it's actually the full setup media. And so when you perform an in-place upgrade where the new version of the operating system is installed over the existing one, now this preserves your data, your application, and configurations. And we know this is extremely important because in many cases, sometimes customers will tell us, look, Jeff, I got a server that was given to me through a merger and acquisition. I inherited this server. I can't rebuild this configuration. I don't have the source code. I don't have the setup media. I literally just have it on a physical server or in a virtual machine, and I just need to upgrade to keep it going. With that in mind, let's kind of talk about what our existing media upgrades support. Rob, can you kind of walk people through what an N-2 upgrade means and what that's looked like in the past?
Right. Yeah. So in previous releases, we've only supported upgrades from the two previous releases. So, for example, if you were on Server 2012 R2, then you could upgrade that to either 2016 or 2019 if you had the media. Right. So if you had the DVD or the ISO in hand, then you could upgrade it from two previous versions, N-2, two versions back. And so, yeah, we've supported in-place upgrade using the media or media-based upgrades for quite a while. And it's been quite successful, actually.
Exactly. And one of the big things we changed in this release with Windows Server 2025 is for the first time, we have N-4 support. So if you go back to the example that Rob just gave, if you're on 2012 R2, and you wanted to go up to 2025, if you were using N-2, you'd actually have to do 2 hops. You'd have to go to 2019 and then to 2025. Well, with N-4 upgrades, we're supporting 4 versions back. So I could be on 2012 R2, go directly to 2025. I could be on 2016 or 2019 or 2022, all 4 of these versions, and go directly to Windows Server 2025 in one hop. So this makes it really easy, especially as we know folks are, finishing up getting their legacy OSs like 2012 R2, want to get on modern supported OSs. This makes that process even easier. Now, a couple things to keep in mind. People always ask me, well, what are some of the things I should know about before I do this? Well, of course, some of your best practices as a sysadmin or an IT pro really come into bear here. Of course, make sure that the OS is fully patched before beginning the upgrade. So go to Windows Update, click, 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 make sure there's no more updates, then do the media upgrade. And of course, always when you're performing any sort of OS action like this, have backups, have snapshots. If this is virtual machines, it's really easy, but make sure you have backups and recoveries. And in fact, to show you what this looks like, rather than talk about it, here's an actual demonstration. Now, in the upper left-hand corner, I've got Windows Server 2012 R2. In the upper right-hand corner, I've got Windows Server 2016. In the lower left-hand corner, I've got Windows Server 2019, and in the lower right-hand corner, I've got 2022. All of them have a virtual DVD and ISO file in all of these. I recorded this. This is all happening in real time. The only thing I've done is sped it up because we weren't going to sit around here for 10 minutes to watch an upgrade occur. But it is literally in real time upgrading all 4 OSs simultaneously, 2012 R2, 2016, 2019, and 2022 to Windows Server 2025. And just like that, you can see we've done it. That's the beauty and the power of having the N-4 media upgrade. So this is a really awesome feature and capability to help you get off some of those legacy OSs. Now, one of the things that we get asked about constantly, though, is, okay, wait a minute, there's got to be more to this. Like, what are some of the things that I should really consider if I want to go through a media upgrade? Well, there are a couple of important considerations. And the first question you should ask yourself is this a virtual machine or is this a physical machine? So let's start with the virtual machines because those are easy. If you're in Hyper-V, we're going to upgrade all the guest drivers automatically. You're set, you're taken care of. It's not an issue at all. It's going to be real easy. If you're on VMware or any other third-party virtualization, please, I'm begging you, it's important that you make sure you have the latest version of the guest drivers installed. This is critical because we take an inordinate amount of calls on issues like this where people are using really old versions of guest drivers and trying to upgrade to a modern OS. So make sure you upgrade your guest drivers first. Now let's switch to physical machines, okay? So if you're on a physical server and it's a modern server, a few years old, it's probably not a big deal. But what if it's one that's from like 2012? Okay, so that's a machine that's over a decade old. So one of the things you should be thinking about is when I look at the hardware, I'm actually not worried about the CPU or the motherboard. Okay. The thing I'm actually most concerned about is what are the add-in cards? Or is there a storage controller? What's the type of NIC? Is there a RAID controller in there? Do I have drivers for these? Is this hardware even supported on 2025? You may find out that, you know what? Actually, the vendor only supported it to 2019, so that's as far as I can go. Okay, then you've got some choices to make. Or the other thing is, you may want to ask yourself, does this need to even be running in a physical machine anymore? Why haven't I virtualized this? Why isn't it running at a Hyper-V VM? Because this wouldn't be an issue at all. So the key thing to keep in mind is from a physical standpoint, again, look at some of the PCI cards and check to make sure that those have the necessary drivers for you to be successful. And again, make sure that you, of course, create backups and snapshots before doing any sort of upgrades. Okay, so that's media upgrades. And again, that's where you've got a physical DVD or ISO. But we also have a new type of update called a feature update with Windows Update. Rob, can you kind of explain to folks what is a Windows feature update?
Sure. A feature update is the same thing as an OS upgrade. In other words, it's a major release. So it's a major annual release or biannual release of the operating system. So a feature update is a much larger package. It's a new OS version, and it's much larger than, say, a monthly update, an LCU, or a hot patch.
And like you said, it's basically performing an in-place upgrade on a server. One of the things to point out, I think it's really important to understand, is this is actually code that has been tried and true and tested at massive scale with Windows Client. We went from Windows 7 to Windows 8, from Windows 8 to Windows 10, from Windows 10 to Windows 11, all through feature updates via Windows Update. So it's been so successful there. And again, we wanted to really solve the problem and challenge where, folks like yourself are telling us, hey, make it easier, Microsoft, for us to upgrade our server versions. So that's why we introduced this feature update to Windows Server 2025, a feature we've never had this before. And what it looks like is here in Windows Update, you'll see there's an advertisement here for Windows Server 2025. And it says, hey, the next version is here with new features and security improvements, which you'll select download and install, and the upgrade will begin. I do want to be clear here. If you click download and install, you're actually going to get a second screen that's going to say, here's a little bit more text. So we're actually making you click twice to accept this. Okay, so this isn't just a one click and starts installing. The other thing I want to be clear about is we do not push this update. We will never push an OS upgrade for Windows Server. That's never going to happen, okay? So you have to go in there and you have to enable this. You have to click on and download and install, and you have to click on accept and install. So I just want to be clear about that. The other thing to point out, of course, is we give you all of the tools to be able to configure how this advertisement is delivered. In many cases, a customer has looked at this and goes, hey, this is pretty awesome. This is going to allow us to get from 2019 or 22 very quickly to Windows Server 2025. In other cases, we've had organizations say, you know what, we need to do some more testing. We've got lots of applications, and while we're in favor of this, we need a little bit more time. So we've provided group policy so you can hide all of this that's completely configurable. Now, in addition, you're seeing Windows Update here from the GUI. And again, we support 2019 and 2022. So this is N-2. So you can upgrade directly from 2019 to 2025 or 2022 to 2025. We also support in-place upgrades if you're using Server Core. A lot of people like Server Core. It's a minimal deployment. There's no GUI. It's a command line interface. We allow you to do feature updates from sconfig. However, I do want to point out this is only available from Windows Server 2022. So this is an N-1. And the reason why is because this was literally a brand new feature update. And this is the first time we've ever done it. And the first time we also delivered it through sconfig. So this is a feature available, again, feature updates with Windows Server 2025. Now, when it comes to controlling updates, I mentioned this earlier, so I'm going to go ahead and pass this on to Rob so we can talk about this in a little bit more detail. But we actually have the ability to control these feature updates. Rob, can you kind of walk us through disabling these feature updates via group policy?
Yeah, sure. So when you want to disable the feature updates, you can do it using the group policy editor, our friendly tool, gpedit. And so all you do is you run gpedit, and then you find the target feature update version, the TRV, and you can just type the word hold into that dialog box and push OK. And then that will prevent any feature update from showing on your servers.
Yeah, this prevents the advertisement banner from showing up in Windows Update. So again, for large organizations, group policy, I'm sure you already have group policies in your organization. This is just, we gave you that flexibility to disable this. For folks that may not use group policy or want to do third-party scripting or other tools, we can also disable these feature updates via the registry. So here are the registry keys to disable feature updates. And again, this is all fully documented at microsoftlearning.com, but here are the reg keys to actually disable feature updates. Now, of course, once you've disabled them, like I said, most likely you're going to test these for a few months. You're going to come back and say, hey, this is great. Everything works awesome. Now we want to go ahead and actually re-enable it. So as Rob mentioned, you're going to go into the Group Policy Editor, MSC. You're going to go to choose that target feature update. You're going to click Enable it. And for the target version, enter 2025. And so this will go ahead now and enable, through Group Policy, that banner ad in Windows Update for Windows Server 2025. Now, one other important point to point out is I mentioned earlier that this is a feature that started on Windows Client. We've had feature updates. Again, you could go from Windows 7 to Windows 8, from Windows 8 to Windows 10, and from Windows 10 to Windows 11. However, I want to point out an important byproduct of that. So with Client, you could actually be running as a standard user, not as an administrator, as a standard user, and you could do this update, which is great for a laptop. However, that feature also carries on over to server. Now, it may not be a big deal because you're not going to have most random users on your servers. However, if you have an RDS server, you don't want someone logged into an RDS server as a standard user that actually enables this. So, recommendation is to prevent non-admins from updating servers. There's a group policy that basically allows non-administrators to receive update notifications. Disable that. What it means is that you have to be an administrator to actually go into Windows Update and be able to do those upgrades. Again, especially important on RDS servers. Now, I'm sure you get asked about this all the time, Rob. I know I do. So after you go through a feature update, what do I need to be thinking about when it comes to activation? Rob, can you walk us through that?
Sure. So it's important after you upgrade the operating system to activate it so that you can call support, right? Support wants to help you, right? But they'll check if your system's activated, right? And so usually that will be done with KMS host system or key management system. So it's important to have the Windows Server 2025 key correctly configured and loaded into that KMS system so that all your servers, once you upgrade them to 2025, will be activated.
And as I pointed out, when you were in Windows Update and you clicked on, hey, I want to upgrade, and I brought up that second screen, this actually is in there as a reminder, but I've seen quite a few people actually go right by this text. So just as a reminder, yes, you've got to go through activation. It's good to have those keys and all of that stuff already pre-flighted before you do it. But again, it does need to be activated. So that's how activation works with Windows Server 2025. Make sure you update your KMS host to support 2025. Now, of course, whenever we talk about doing upgrades, almost every time you bring up this topic, the first thing someone says, what about domain controllers? Well, what about domain controllers? Let's talk about upgrading domain controllers. To be very clear, domain controllers are special. They are a special role. Active Directory is what we call a multi-master directory service. And what it means is that changes to the directory data can be made on any domain controller within the domain, and then those are automatically replicated to other domain controllers. It's a multi-master service. So it's automatically replicating, and it's ensuring that there's no single point of failure for redundancy and high availability. And it's one of the hallmark features of Active Directory. It is just so rock solid with this high availability built in. Now, I do want to point out, when it comes to domain controllers, they do have a couple of cases where it's actually not a multi-master. There could be specific scenarios where a specific domain controller is in charge, and it's actually specifying operations to the rest of the domain controllers in the domain. And a good example of this, and these are called flexible single master operations or FSMO operations. A good example is a schema update. So if there's a schema update, which by the way is not common at all, it doesn't happen, doesn't happen often, but when it does, a domain controller will actually push those schema updates to all of the domain controllers to ensure that it's done on a consistent basis. Once all of those domain controllers have been upgraded and all the schemas have been updated, then boom, you're out of FSMA mode and automatically you're back to the way AD normally works as a multi-master directory service. So the reason why I bring all of this up, and I'm just kind of explaining a little bit why AD is special this way, is because the process for upgrading domain controllers has been the same for decades. Quite simply, set up a new domain controller, so Windows Server 2025. Synchronize your old domain controllers with the new one. Turn off the old domain controller. So if they were 2019 or 2016, great. You synchronize them to 2025. Now you turn off those old 2016 and 2019s, and you add more of your Windows Server 2025 domain controllers until all of them are 2025 DCs. Then you can raise the force functional level and domain functional level. Once you do that, you can take advantage of the new Active Directory features in Windows Server 2025. For example, the new 32K page database is built into Windows Server 2025. But to get that feature, you have to be running at the new 2025 domain force and functional level. So that's upgrading domain controllers. Like I said, the process has been the same for decades. Don't expect that to change soon, if ever, because again, it is special. It's a multi-master directory service. So Next, let's talk about upgrading clusters. And Rob, this has you written all over it, so I'm going to let you talk about the process of OS upgrades of failover clusters.
Thanks, Jeff. Yep, it's my favorite topic. So there are, of course, several different approaches to upgrading a failover cluster. You can use our automation process, cluster aware updating, to upgrade your cluster. And the nice thing is you can use Cow to pull the feature update from either media, if you have media, or from Windows Update online. Now, when you're upgrading a failover cluster with Cow, it's a sequential process, right? You pause each node, drain it, upgrade it, often reboot it, and then repeat until you've done your entire cluster. And I should mention that cluster upgrades are restricted to only one version at a time. So you can go from 2012 R2 to 2016, 2016 to 2019, 2020, 2019 to 2022, 2022 to 2025. Right, but it's only one version at a time. We don't support N-2, we don't support N-4 in the context of a failover cluster. And of course, you can do this process manually if you wanted to. So for some reason, if you don't want to use the orchestrator, you can also do this completely manually for full control. So if you have media, then here are some commandlets you use. There's self-updating mode with the add cow cluster role, or you can use sort of like the imperative or immediate run with invoke cow run there.
And so this is a media-based upgrade from 2022 to 2025, and this is all the PowerShell to do that for that. And again, all of this is also documented as well at Microsoft Learn. Now this is media upgrade, and then we also have this for the feature update as well.
That's right. That's right. So if you want to use Windows Update to retrieve the feature update bundle and upgrade your cluster from 22 to 25, then these are the commandlets you'd use. You'd use our new rolling upgrade plugin to do that. And the rolling upgrade plugin handles all the orchestration for the feature update, right? So it will do the scan, and then it will also, do the entire orchestration itself.
Awesome. So we've talked a lot about upgrades today. We've talked about media upgrades. We talked about N-4. We've talked about feature updates. We've talked about cluster updates. We talked about domain controllers. However, one thing I do want to point out is, we do realize that depending on the upgrade, depending on what you're doing and how you're doing the upgrade, there could be a little, it can vary as to what the supported N- basically is. So I wanted to create a quick key here. So again, if you're doing a media-based upgrade on a standalone server, whether it's physical or virtual, we support N-4, which means you can go all the way back from 2012 R2 and upgrade it directly to 2025 in one hop. So we support media-based upgrades on a single server. If you're doing a feature update via Windows Update, then we support N-2, whether it's 2019 or 2022, and that's with the full GUI. If you're using sconfig because you have a server core deployment, then we support feature updates, but that's N-1. And then finally, when it comes to clusters, as Rob mentioned, we've got failover cluster support through cow integration and failover clustering, but that's N-1. So you could go from Windows Server 2022 to 2025. And of course, you can use clusterware updating for full OS upgrade orchestration. So again, lots of options, and really the goal here is we want to make this as flexible as we can for you. We know a lot of folks still have older OSs they've been in the process of upgrading, and we want to make it as easy as possible, reduces any friction in here so that you can quickly get to a modern, secure, and supported OS. So finally, really a call to action here. Like I mentioned at the top, 2025 is feature rich, folks. And you're seeing that here at the Windows Server Summit this week. Whether it's Active Directory, Hyper-V, storage, SDN, security, file services, and so much more, there's a lot of reasons why you're going to want to get to 2025 sooner rather than later. One important thing I want to point out, by the way, is there are no new hardware requirements. So please upgrade away. I bring this up because I know on the Windows client side, a TPM is required for Windows 11. However, for 2025, a TPM is recommended. We certainly will use it and we would recommend it, but it is not required because we know that there are some servers that are still supported that didn't ship with TPMs. Now, if you buy a new server, If you call up your favorite server vendor and your server partner, they will sell you a brand new Windows server, and it will have a TPM, and it will be, it'll be supported right out of the box to give you maximum security. But if you do still have some older servers without TPMs, or if you're in a virtual machine that doesn't have it, then it is not required. It is simply recommended. And again, as we've talked about through this session, Windows Server 2025 really is the easiest upgrade ever, with N-4 media upgrades, with new feature updates through Windows Update. We really have done everything we can to make it as easy as possible for you to upgrade. So, Rob, thank you so much for the opportunity to present, and this has been a lot of fun. Thank you, Rob.
Cool. Yeah, thank you, Jeff. Really appreciate it, and I love your video with the 4 upgrades simultaneously.
It's really cool. I always have to point out to everyone that I did that real. That's a completely real demo with all 4 virtual machines being upgraded simultaneously. I just sped it up for time because, again, we didn't have 10 minutes for that. Well, thank you, everybody. Hope you enjoyed this session and hope you enjoy the rest of the Windows Server Summit. Thank you so much.